Let's talk about working with if-else conditions. An if statement is really a test. It allows you to test for certain conditions, and then if a condition is met, if a condition is true, then it's going to execute a block of statements or a single statement. It's up to you. Now, this is used so much in validations, all types of things. What you need to keep in mind is that there are these operators, logical operators, and comparison operators. But when you deal with if conditions and other ways of working within PHP, you're going to be dealing with and or not. So you can either use the double ampersand, which is true of a lot of application programming languages like C and C++, Java, and an or, double pipe for the or exclamation point for not. These two, you can use not or exclamation point. If you're coming from VB, for example, you would be familiar with not. And what this does is, it does the opposite. So if something's true, it becomes false. If something's false, it becomes true. So we'll see that. But and or are the two common ways to do that. And you can use either way. And or double ampersand, double pipe, or. And when you do comparisons, you check for equality. You want to find out if the variable A is equal to the variable B. Well, you put double equal sign instead of just one equal sign, because a single equal sign is an assignment. So if you do that, you actually assign the value on the right of the equation to the value on the left. And that's not what you want to do. So you want to be very careful. Happens a lot with beginners, so it'll probably happen to you. It happens to everybody. And if you want to test not equal to, that's the way it goes. And you might be familiar with less than or greater than for not equal to, like with regular algebra and things like that you might have from high school or something like that. And then the less than, the greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. So we have something on the left and something on the right. All right. So looking within our if-else PHP file in the looping and the flow control and looping folder, we've already seen this partially in the operators video. We set some booleans up here to true or false. False or true, these can be uppercase or lowercase. I always have it uppercase just for the fact that you want to be able to see them, and it's just a general standard way to do it. You can see we just assigned a couple of variables, and now we're just testing for some values. We'll see if a lot later on, a lot. We're going to be using it quite often. So what we have here is an if statement. You can have a space or not. White space isn't important. You only use that for clarity. But you definitely need a opening parenthesis here and a closing parenthesis here. You definitely need that, or you're going to get a syntax error. And also the brackets here to separate one or more lines. If you only have one line that needs to get executed, you don't need the brackets here. You can eliminate that, as you're going to see. But if you have multiple lines, even if it's commented out, you need to have the brackets to separate that these are the lines that are going to be meeting this solution here. Whether it's true or false, they're going to be executed if this is true. If it's false, if it executes to false, it won't get executed. So if $A is greater than $B, each statement will get executed here. Otherwise, it'll just continue down to this next line here, the next statement, whatever that may be. So true will execute the statements. So if $A is less than $B, if A is less than B, then we're going to try to do this. So it's testing one or the other. A switch statement is a lot easier to put that together, and also an else statement is easier. But note that you have to keep in mind that A can be greater than B, A can be less than B, or A can be equal to B. Those are the logical things that could happen. So in these two cases, we're not testing for equality. So maybe in another case, you want to check for that less than or equal to, or do something if it's equal to. Have another if statement or something like that. Now you can note that we can do complex things. We're doing an and. So this and that. You don't need the extra parentheses around each of these little conditions, but it helps. It helps to clarify, because this can get very complex if you have a very complex if condition. Definitely can get very complex. But you use the regular logic and algebra type things when you're working with the parentheses. This will get executed first, or actually determine whether this is true or not. It'll get tested. And then this other side. And together we have our open and close parentheses there to separate things. So if this and that, They both have to be true in order for this whole expression here to evaluate to true. And if it is true, then this will get executed. If either one of these is false, this will not get executed because overall it will get evaluated to false. False and false, false and true, or true and false are all going to evaluate to false. So if you have something like the sky is blue and the ocean is pink, if the ocean is pink, but hopefully not, then this is going to evaluate to false most times. Definitely. So that makes the whole statement false. Because if the sky is blue, that's great. But if the ocean isn't pink, then that means everything is false. That statement is false. And that's how it works. You can see the rest. Or is the opposite, this or that. So a true or a false or a true will evaluate to true. Because you only need one or the other. And that's the difference there. And then we just have another way to do it without the parentheses. Note that these parentheses are here for the satisfaction of us being able to read this easily. And the white space there, that's added for good measure so you can see what's going on. You don't even need the white space there. Another way is actually to put the brackets on another line. Remember that white space, it doesn't matter. You can put it up here or you can put it down here. It doesn't matter. You can even eliminate that in this case because you only have one statement. But since it's commented, you need to have the brackets. Otherwise, it would assume something else and it wouldn't work correctly, or it's really not good programming style. All right, so we have else. So if this happens, if it's true, then we do this. Else, notice the brackets closing this section and then having another section. So if this is true, then do this. Otherwise, do this. So it's true, do this, or if this comes in and executes as false, evaluates to false, then we do that. And in the comments, you see another set of things here, if else and else if. So else if is another way to do this. And it works like a switch statement, as we're going to see. And note that all the actual brackets are on the same line. You can put multiple lines there if you want to, if it makes things easier for you. It does evaluate. It is perfectly fine to write things like this. You can see why it is so, because the brackets separate and the semicolons are there on those statements, on those lines. We need a statement here, a semicolon with this statement, in order to make this proper syntax. The if-else statements and statements that have opening brackets and closing brackets, they don't need to have a semicolon at the end. It's not necessary. And notice the final thing is an else. We'll see switch and how that works. And just a simpler example. Note that the else if has its own condition there that's tested. It's different than a regular else statement, as you can see. And here's another example. If something, a file exists, we have a double ampersand for and we're checking for a file existing and a particular file time being greater than regular time. So it's two different sides here. This is tested and then this is tested. And you can see how that works. But that's a standard thing that you might come across or you might need to do. And we'll just comment that out. So we have some code here, as you can see. False, true, false, true. So all we're doing is, you've seen this already, with the operators video, we're just coming down here and having if statements embedded here, inside here. No problem, right? This is an example of something that is having an if condition to echo something out. If this part is going to be true, if this is true, then it echoes this out, otherwise it echoes that out. And we know that with Booleans, you're only going to see one for a true if you echo it or print it, and on a 0 or a false, you're not going to see that echoed or printed. You have to take care of that and change it. That's why I do it this way. And those are 3 examples of that. Finally, we have another way that we can actually use if statements. Now, this is common to use this inside your code, to embed it within your code, meaning that you have an if condition here inside with the PHP, for example, and then later on you have the closing bracket. And that's very helpful because this is going to have a test here. And if that's true, then this output, this HTML, will get added to the output that's going to be displayed. Otherwise, it won't. So if we look at the example here, we say, well, what is this line here below? That's because this Boolean value, if you look at the top, is set to false. And what we do is we have this set to check if it's not equal to false. And since it is false, this doesn't get executed. So we will change this to equals false. Save that out, right click, refresh, and then you can see it's taken care of there. It's added here. And what it's adding is a table. So we have a little table here, little table cell here, and then we're going to add another table inside of that if this is going to be true or not equal to false. So that's why it's not visible. It's common to do that. Here's another common thing to do. To add this here, make sure you add the closing bracket like I mentioned, and here's another way to add a whole table. Normally I use include statements to do that, and I put all that code up at the top, and that way I don't have to look for if statements and things like that in my code, because it does make it sloppy. It's an older way to code, but lots of people still do that, and lots of even commercial code expects that. So as you wish, but that's if and else if for the most part. We'll see it a lot as we move through the training.